She walked into the coffee shop with her chin slightly down, one hand instinctively brushing the left side of her face, a gesture so practiced it had become invisible to her. He was already there. Damon Cross, billionaire, widower, father, a man who had negotiated with presidents and walked away from deals worth hundreds of millions without blinking. But the moment Elena Rowan sat across from him and whispered, "I'm sorry. I know I'm not what you expected," something cracked open in his chest that no boardroom had ever touched. This is where everything changed. If this story finds you tonight, drop your city in the comments and hit that like button. Let's see how far this one travels. Now stay with me, because what happens next, nobody in that coffee shop saw coming. The rain had been threatening Chicago all afternoon, hanging low and gray over the skyline like it couldn't quite commit to falling. Damon Cross stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his 43rd floor office and watched the clouds press down against the lake. Behind him, two monitors glowed with open contracts. A half-drunk espresso sat cooling on his desk. His assistant, Marcus, had knocked 3 times in the last hour, trying to get him to sign off on a shipping acquisition that would have made most men his age weep with excitement. Damon hadn't touched the files. He was thinking about his daughter. Lily had turned 7 2 weeks ago. She'd asked for a birthday cake shaped like a dragon. Not a princess, not a fairy, a dragon. And when he'd paid the bakery triple the rate to make it happen overnight, she'd looked at it for exactly 4 seconds before announcing that the dragon's wings were the wrong color. "They should be purple, Daddy, not blue. Everyone knows that." He'd laughed so hard he'd nearly knocked the cake off the table. And then, 3 minutes later, standing in the kitchen of his penthouse, while Lily blew out the candles surrounded by a small army of stuffed animals she'd insisted be invited to the party, he'd felt the loneliness hit him in that particular way it always did on the big days. Not the sharp, sudden grief of the early years after Caroline died. That had changed shape. Now it came slower, like pressure. The weight of all the moments he was experiencing alone, with no one beside him to say, "Did you see that? Did you hear what she just said?" It wasn't self-pity. He'd never been built for that. It was just factual. He was a 32-year-old man raising a firecracker of a daughter in an apartment with 11 rooms, and sometimes in the evenings when Lily was asleep and the city spread out beneath him like something from a dream, the silence had teeth, which was how he'd ended up agreeing to the blind date. Eek. His friend and attorney, Vincent Park, had been quietly relentless about it for months. "One coffee," Vince had said for approximately the 30th time 3 days ago. They'd been in a parking garage after a deposition, Vince eating a vending machine sandwich with the resignation of a man who'd made peace with his choices. Not a dinner, not a yacht, coffee, 1 hour. You can literally schedule a reason to leave. "I don't need a reason. I'll just leave." See, that attitude is why you're eating dinner alone every night. I eat dinner with Lily. Lily is 7. She eats her pasta in alphabetical order and then asks you to narrate her bedtime story in 3 different character voices. That doesn't count as adult conversation, Damon. She's excellent company. She's 7. Damon had said nothing, which Vince, after 7 years of friendship, correctly interpreted as defeat. "Her name is Elena Rowan," Vince said, pulling out his phone. "She's 30. She works in nonprofit administration, which, before you say anything, means she didn't agree to meet you because of your net worth, because honestly, I don't think she knows who you are. I may have told her you work in finance." Damon looked at him. "You told a woman I work in finance." I simplified. "My company employs 43,000 people across 6 continents. That's a lot of context for a first conversation, Damon. I was being considerate." He'd said yes because Vince looked genuinely hopeful, which was a rare and slightly pathetic look on a man who argued Supreme Court precedents for a living. He'd said yes because Lily had asked him that morning, completely out of nowhere, if he was ever going to have a person like her friend Sophie's dad had a person, and he hadn't known what to say. He'd said yes because it was just coffee. He arrived at Ember & Cumberty Coffee on West Randolph 12 minutes early, which was unusual. Damon Cross was never early. He was precise. He came from a family of people who treated punctuality as a moral virtue and financial performance as a love language. And somewhere in the machinery of his upbringing, he'd developed an almost pathological aversion to appearing eager about anything. but he'd shown up early because he didn't know what else to do with the 12 minutes. The place was exactly the kind of coffee shop that tried hard not to look like it was trying hard. Exposed brick, mismatched wooden chairs, a chalkboard menu written in someone's self-consciously imperfect handwriting. Jazz played low from somewhere. It smelled like dark roast and something baking. Damon ordered a black coffee, chose a corner table with his back to the wall, a habit he'd developed over years of being recognized in public, and sat down. He checked his phone. He answered 2 emails. He thought about the shipping acquisition. He thought about whether he'd remembered to tell Mrs. Alvarez, Lily's after-school caregiver, about the Thursday pickup change. He'd forgotten. He sent a text. He was in the middle of reading a quarterly report he definitely hadn't meant to open when the door of the coffee shop swung open and let in a rush of cold October air. And Elena Rowan walked in. She wasn't what he'd expected, not because of anything dramatic. She just didn't walk into the room the way that most people did when they were about to meet someone they'd been thinking about. There was no performative casualness, no "that was so hard to park" expression, no smile preloaded and ready for contact. She walked in looking at the floor for about 3 steps, then looked up and scanned the room with brown eyes that were doing something Damon recognized after a fraction of a second. They were calculating exits. Not literally, but in the way that people who'd been in a lot of uncomfortable situations learned to map a room before they committed to entering it. She was wearing a dark green coat that was a size too large, and a soft gray scarf wound high around the left side of her neck. Brown hair, slightly damp at the ends from the rain, pulled back in a way that was more practical than intentional. She was pretty in the way that someone is pretty when they haven't thought about it recently. And she was nervous. He could see that from the corner table before she'd even found him. Their eyes met when she was about 8 feet from the table. Her expression did something complicated in under a second. Recognition, relief, and then immediately something else. Something bracing, the way a person looks before they step into cold water. "Damon?" Her voice was quieter than he'd expected. He stood up. "Elena. Hi." "Hi." She pulled out the chair across from him with slightly more force than necessary. The kind of thing you do when your hands have nowhere else to be. "I'm sorry, She glanced at her phone. "I'm 2 minutes late. The train—" "You're not late," he said. "I was early." She looked at him, a little uncertain, then settled into the chair and unwound a bit of the scarf. Not all of it, enough to breathe. "Can I get you a coffee?" He half stood. "Oh, no, I'll get it." She was already reaching for her purse. "I've got it," he said, and the words came out in the same tone he used in meetings that weren't actually up for discussion. He caught himself and softened it. "Please, what do you drink?" A small pause. "Oat milk latte, 1 sugar." "I'll be right back." "Hop it," he ordered at the counter. While he waited, he took a slow breath and reminded himself he wasn't in a meeting. There were no stakes here. He was a grown man who could handle coffee. When he came back, she was sitting very still with her hands folded on the table, staring at a point somewhere past his shoulder. He set the latte down and she blinked, refocusing. "Thank you," she said. "Of course." A silence. Not hostile, just new. "So," she said, wrapping both hands around the mug, "Vince tells me you work in finance." And there it was. Damon felt the corner of his mouth move before he could stop it. He said that. He said it pretty confidently. He's a lawyer. Confidence is what he bills by the hour. He set down his own cup. "I run a company, Cross Group. We're in logistics, tech infrastructure, and recently shipping. Finance is technically in there somewhere." She considered this. "That sounds like a lot." "It is." He paused. "And you're in nonprofit work?" "Administration," she said. "I work for a workforce development organization. We help people coming out of long-term unemployment find training and placement." A beat. "It's not very glamorous." "It sounds important." "It is," she said simply, without either false modesty or performance. Just a fact she'd already made peace with. He liked that. The first 15 minutes were fine. Not awkward exactly, but carrying the particular tension of 2 people who had agreed to something and were now figuring out who was going to blink first. She asked about the company in a way that was polite but not dazzled. He asked about her work and actually meant it. She told him about a program they ran that paired long-term unemployed adults over 40 with vocational training, carpentry, HVAC, medical coding, and how the dropout rate in the first semester was their biggest challenge. Because it's not just skills, she said. Most of them have been told in one way or another that they missed their chance. So the hardest part isn't the training. It's convincing them there's still someone it's worth investing in. He was watching her while she talked. She was more expressive than her quiet entrance had suggested. Her hands moved when she was explaining something. Her voice got slightly more sure of itself when she was on a topic she cared about. She wasn't performing enthusiasm. She just had some. "How'd you end up in that work?" he asked. Something shifted in her posture, so slightly that he almost missed it. "I needed a job that felt like it meant something," she said. After a few years that were hard." She paused, then took a sip of her latte. "I know that probably sounds vague." "You don't have to explain anything." "No, She set down the mug. "I'm not great at small talk. I've tried. I think the problem is I always end up saying too much or nothing at all, and there's no middle." "I prefer too much," he said. "The middle is boring." She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. And then, he still wasn't sure exactly how it happened. The conversation started to shift. They'd been talking for about 25 minutes. The coffee shop had filled in around them, the lunch crowd trickling in from the cold, and Damon had ordered a second espresso and forgotten to feel self-conscious about extending the hour. She'd said something that made him laugh, genuinely laugh, not the professional social laugh he'd perfected, but the caught-off-guard kind. About a training participant who'd argued for 30 minutes that carpentry was an art form that couldn't be graded, and therefore the assessment rubric was philosophically invalid. "And was he wrong?" Damon asked. She shook her head, half smiling. "Not entirely," which was the problem. And then, mid-smile, something changed in her eyes. The warmth didn't disappear, but something behind it did. Like she'd been enjoying the conversation and had just remembered something she'd been trying not to remember. She looked down at her cup. Her right hand moved to the left side of her neck, a gesture so automatic it was barely a gesture at all. "I should probably," she started. "You don't have to go?" He hadn't meant for it to come out as a question. "No, She stopped, exhaled slowly through her nose. "I'm sorry," she said, and there was something in the word that didn't belong in the conversation they'd been having. Too heavy. Too practiced. "I know I'm probably not what you expected." Damon went still. "Vince is a good friend," she continued, her voice dropping slightly. "And he's thoughtful. But I've done this before. Gone on dates that were set up by people who genuinely meant well. And I know that when someone meets me in person, it's usually—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "It's usually a different experience than the photos." She turned then, just slightly. Enough. The scarf had shifted sometime in the last half hour, and what it had been covering was now visible. A scar that ran along the left side of her jaw and down her neck, faded to a pale silver pink against her skin, the kind that had been there long enough to settle into the landscape of her face but was still impossible to miss. Not grotesque, not disfiguring in the dramatic sense people use that word, but present, undeniable. She watched his face. He knew she was watching. He didn't look away. He didn't overcompensate. He didn't do the thing she'd clearly seen before, the forced neutrality that was itself a kind of performance. He just looked at her, and then he said, "I'm not disappointed." The quiet that followed those 3 words was different from the silences before. Elena held very still. "I noticed it," he said, "when you walked in. And then I noticed that you have a way of explaining things that makes me feel like the subject is more interesting than I thought it was, and that you laugh at your own stories right before the punchline, which means you're telling them because they genuinely amuse you and not for effect." He paused. "I wasn't thinking about the scar." She looked at him for a long moment. Her eyes were doing something complicated, not quite disbelieving, not quite relieved, something in between that was harder to name. "People say that," she said carefully. "I know. And then they prove otherwise, eventually. It might take a week or a month. But eventually there's a comment or a look or, she stopped herself. I'm not trying to, she exhaled. I'm not accusing you of anything. I've learned that it's easier if I say it first. Say what? That I understand if it's, she seemed to be choosing words with great care, the way you do when you've had a sentence go wrong so many times you've become cautious of it. If it's a lot. For some people it's a lot. And I've gotten to a place where I understand that without taking it personally. She met his eyes. Most days. He didn't say it's not a lot. He didn't say you shouldn't feel that way. He'd spent enough time in rooms where difficult things were said to know that the fastest way to close a door was to rush to reassure someone before they'd finished walking through it. Can I ask you something? He said. She nodded, guarded. When you said you understand people find it a lot, without taking it personally, do you actually believe that? Or is that just what you tell yourself to get through the part where they leave? The silence this time was longer. Her jaw moved slightly. She looked down at her hands around the mug. Both, she said finally, very quietly, depending on the day. Mgupan. The scar came from a car accident, she said, after a moment. She'd said the sentence before. He could tell. It came out with the flatness of something repeated so many times it's lost most of its texture. I was 22. I'd been in the passenger seat. The driver, a friend, he walked away without a scratch. A pause. I don't hold it against him. It was just bad luck geography. How long was recovery? Surgeries took about 18 months total. I just finished my first job after college. I lost it while I was in and out of the hospital. She traced the edge of her mug with one finger, not looking at him. When you're 22 and broke and you've just had 3 surgeries and your face is... She paused. When you look different than you did, and you're applying for jobs, and you walk into rooms and you can tell within 30 seconds what the person across the desk is deciding about you. That does something to how you move through the world. What does it do? He asked. Not to be clinical, just because he wanted to understand the specific shape of it. She was quiet for a moment, considering whether to answer that honestly. It makes you smaller, she said. Not in a self-pity way, more like you start adjusting your size. You don't walk into rooms like you belong there because you've been taught, in 100 small ways, that the jury's still out on that. You start apologizing earlier in conversations. You start saying sorry before you've done anything wrong, just to preempt the disappointment. Damon thought about the first words she'd said when she sat down across from him. I'm sorry I'm late. She hadn't been late. That's why you apologized when you sat down, he said. She blinked. Yeah. A small, unsteady breath. I didn't even realize. They'd been sitting there for an hour and 40 minutes when Elena excused herself to use the restroom. Damon sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, organizing himself. He wasn't sure what he'd expected from this hour. Something civilized, polite, a reasonable adult conversation that might lead to a second one or might not. He was prepared for pleasant and uneventful. He was prepared for the quiet flatness of 2 people who were fine but had no real chemistry. He was not prepared for this. She came back to the table looking slightly less raw than when she'd left. She'd splashed water on her face, probably, or just taken a minute alone, which he understood. She had a small smear of mascara at the corner of one eye that she hadn't caught. He didn't mention it. I should probably let you get back to your day, she said, not sitting back down immediately, one hand on the back of the chair. You've been very... She seemed to be searching for the word. Kind. You didn't have to be this kind. I wasn't being kind, he said. She looked at him. I was being interested, he said. Those are different things. She stood there with her hand on the chair for another second. Sit down, he said. Not unkindly, just certain. After a moment, she did. Dub. Can I tell you something? He said. She wrapped her hands around her cup again, which she seemed to do when she was bracing for something. Okay. I have a daughter. She's 7. Her name is Lily, and she is, genuinely, the most exhausting and extraordinary person I have ever met, and I would walk through fire for her without blinking. He paused. Her mother died when she was 18 months old. Cardiac arrest. No warning, no history, nothing. Here and then gone in a night. Elena had gone very still. She wasn't looking at her cup anymore. I tell you this not because I want you to feel sorry for me, he continued, but because you've been sitting across from me for 2 hours, telling me about all the ways you've had to be brave when nobody was watching. And it felt unfair not to offer something back. He met her eyes. I know what it's like to feel like the world has decided something about you. That you're the sad widower, the cautionary tale, the man who made $1 billion and still couldn't hold his family together. People don't say it. They imply it. And the way they look at you and then at Lily, and you can see them doing the math. That's... She stopped. I'm sorry. That's awful. It's manageable, he said. Most days. He said it the same way she had. She noticed. The corner of her mouth moved. Not a smile exactly. Something more fragile than that. At some point, around the 2-hour mark, when the lunch crowd had thinned and the coffee shop had settled back into its mid-afternoon quiet, the conversation stopped being about pain and became something else. It started when Damon mentioned Lily's birthday cake incident, and Elena laughed. A real laugh, not the careful, guarded kind she'd been offering before, an actual caught-off-guard laugh that crinkled the corners of her eyes and made the coffee shop feel briefly smaller and warmer. She sounds magnificent, Elena said. She's a menace, he said. I say that with complete love. How do you... do you have help? Because running a company and raising a 7-year-old alone sounds like barely controlled chaos. I was going to say impressive. It's both, he said. We have a caregiver, Mrs. Alvarez. She's been with us since Lily was 2. She is more organized than I am, and she doesn't let me get away with anything. He paused. Lily calls her V and has decided they are best friends, which Mrs. Alvarez pretends to find exhausting and clearly loves. That's actually really nice, Elena said, and something in her voice was genuine. That she has a consistent person. It matters. You work with kids too? Not directly, but a lot of the adults we work with, the reason they're long-term unemployed is because they've spent years as caregivers. For kids, for parents, for siblings. They gave up their own stability for someone else's, and then the someone else grew up or passed away, and they're 50 years old with no current work history and a resume that looks like a decade just vanished. She paused. They're not invisible. They just got treated that way. That's what drives you, he said. She seemed slightly surprised to have it named. Yeah, she said simply. I guess that's what it is. I have a weird question, she said sometime later. Go ahead. Is this going well for you? She said it with the directness of someone who'd gotten tired of trying to read signals and started asking for clarity instead. Because I genuinely can't tell. You're very... She circled her hand in the air. Even. Hard to read. That's a professional hazard, he said. I've spent 15 years learning not to react to things in rooms full of people who are watching for reactions. Right, that makes sense. She chewed her lip. Because for me, it's going... She seemed to be making a decision about how honest to be. Better than I thought it would, and I don't want to assume that's mutual and then get it wrong. Damon looked at her for a moment. It's mutual, he said. A pause. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, good. At 2 hours and 40 minutes, long past any reasonable definition of just coffee, Elena finally looked at her phone and made a small, startled sound. I have a 3:30 meeting, she said. She looked up. I'm sorry. I didn't realize how long... Don't apologize. She caught herself. Right. She almost smiled. I'm going to try to stop doing that. Good. He reached for his jacket. Can I walk you to the train? She looked at him for a second. It's 2 blocks. I know where the Brown line is, he said. I used to live down here. Outside, the rain had finally made good on its threat, a light but persistent drizzle that made the sidewalk gleam. He didn't have an umbrella. Neither did she. They walked the 2 blocks at a pace that neither of them would have described, if asked, as trying to delay anything. At the top of the stairs going down to the platform, she stopped and turned to face him. I want to say something, she said. Rain was catching on her coat, in her hair. And I want to say it right, so bear with me. Okay. She took a breath. I almost didn't come today. I sat on the train this morning and I almost turned around and went home because I've done this enough times that I know how it goes, and I didn't think I had it in me to do the apologizing early, the watching someone's face, the whole thing. She paused. And I'm really glad I didn't turn around. He stood with his hands in his jacket pockets and the rain coming down and said, I'm really glad you didn't either. She looked at him for another second, like she was deciding something. Then she said, okay, and nodded once and started down the stairs. She was 2 steps down when she turned back and said, Damon? He'd been watching her go. The scar, she said. The thing you said earlier about how if someone could only see the scar. She paused. Nobody's ever said it like that to me before. So, she held his gaze for a moment. Thank you. He didn't say you don't have to thank me. He didn't say it's nothing. He just nodded. She turned and went down the stairs. He stood at the top until he couldn't hear her footsteps anymore. The rain kept coming. He stood there another 30 seconds, thinking about his daughter, and a stranger in a green coat, and the strange specific weight of an afternoon that had turned into something he didn't have a name for yet. Then he turned up his collar and walked back in the direction he'd come from. He had a company to run. A 7-year-old who needed picking up. A shipping acquisition he'd been ignoring all day. But his phone was already in his hand, and he was already composing the text to Vince. He typed, You owe me an apology for calling it finance. He typed, and also, thank you. He put the phone back in his pocket without sending either of them and started walking, and didn't try to name what he was feeling yet. Some things needed a little time before they'd hold still long enough to be looked at. He sent both texts to Vince that night. Not separately, not carefully, just typed them out in sequence around 9:30, sitting at the kitchen island after Lily was asleep, a glass of water in front of him that he kept forgetting to drink. The apartment was the kind of quiet that only existed after a 7-year-old had fully exhausted herself, which happened suddenly and completely, like a light switch. One moment Lily had been narrating an elaborate conflict between 3 stuffed animals and a plastic dinosaur, assigning each of them dialogue with terrifying specificity, and then 20 minutes later she was out cold with her face mashed into a pillow and the dinosaur clutched in one fist. He'd stood in her doorway for a moment the way he always did. It was a habit he couldn't explain and didn't try to. Just stood there in the dark for 30 seconds, listening to her breathe, before he closed the door and went back to the kitchen. Vince replied at 9:34. Finance is technically accurate. Then, also, thank you, noted. I'm putting that in writing for the next time you tell me I meddle. Damon set the phone down. He sat there in the quiet of his kitchen, which was large and expensively designed and, at this hour, felt like a room that was waiting for something he hadn't figured out yet. He thought about the coffee shop, the rain, the way Elena had stood at the top of the train stairs in her too large green coat and said thank you, like someone returning something she'd been holding for a very long time and hadn't expected to be able to put down. He thought about the apologizing before she'd done anything, how automatic it was, how she hadn't even noticed. He didn't know Elena Rowan. He'd spent 3 hours with her in a coffee shop. That was not enough to know someone. He knew that. He also knew that there were people you spent years with and never really saw, and people you spent an afternoon with and couldn't stop thinking about on a Tuesday night in your kitchen, and that the difference had nothing to do with time. He opened his phone again, found her contact. Vince had put it in before the date, helpfully, without being asked. Sat with his thumb over it for a moment. He typed, I left something in the coffee shop. I think it was the part of me that doesn't do this. He stared at it, deleted it. Too much, way too much. He typed, I'd like to see you again, if you're open to it. He looked at that for a while. It was honest and direct and borderline boring, which was at least accurate. He sent it. Her response came 11 minutes later, which he was not timing. I thought you might not ask. Then, yes. And that. The second time they met was not a date. At least that was what he told himself when he suggested it, because what he actually proposed was meeting at the Chicago Riverwalk on a Saturday afternoon, which sounded casual and incidental right up until he realized he'd been thinking about what to wear for 20 minutes, which hadn't happened to him in a very long time. He told himself it wasn't a date. Then he put on the charcoal jacket. Elena was already there when he arrived, sitting on the low concrete edge of the riverwalk with a paper coffee cup in both hands, watching the water. She wasn't on her phone. She wasn't performing patience or availability. She was just sitting there, watching the river do what rivers do, and there was something so uncomplicatedly present about it that he paused for a second before she saw him, just to look at it. She'd worn the scarf again, wound up around her neck. He noticed without cataloging it. "You're on time," she said when he came over. "I tried not to be early," he said. "I managed it by about 4 minutes. That's very human of you." "I have my moments." She slid over on the concrete edge without quite making an invitation of it, just making room, and he sat down beside her. The river was doing its October thing, gray and restless, with the tourist boats long since docked for the season and the foot traffic thin enough that you could hear the water. They talked for 2 hours without sitting down to anything more formal than that concrete ledge, and the coffees she'd already had waiting when he arrived, which he noticed and didn't comment on except to say thank you, meaning something larger than the coffee. She told him about her week, which had been difficult. A training cohort she'd been working with for 4 months had lost 3 participants in 1 week due to a change in their housing situations, and the emotional weight of watching people almost make it and then get pulled back by something completely outside their control was the kind of thing that didn't leave you at the office. "Do you ever take it home?" he asked. "The work?" "Every single day," she said, without pretense. "I used to feel bad about that. I thought it meant I wasn't professional enough. But then I figured out that the days I didn't take it home were the days I'd started not caring, and that was actually worse." "Who do you talk to about it?" She considered that. "My friend Priya. She's a social worker. She gets it." A pause. "And I journal, which I know sounds like something from a self-help book, but it works, so." "What else works?" She looked sideways at him. "Why do you ask like that?" "Like what?" "Like you're taking notes." He thought about it. "Habit," he said. "I want to understand how things actually function for people, not the surface version." "That's a little intense for a Saturday." "I know." She almost smiled. "Long walks, terrible TV, cooking something that requires more steps than is strictly necessary." She paused. "The act of doing something with your hands that has a concrete result when your actual work is invisible most of the time. It helps." "What do you cook?" "Yesterday I made congee from scratch, at 10:30 at night." That's extremely specific. "It takes 45 minutes, and you have to stir it, and you get to eat it at the end. That's a good deal." He laughed. She smiled properly this time, catching it before it fully arrived, which was something he'd noticed she did, like she'd learned to moderate her own warmth in case it wasn't returned. He filed that away without knowing exactly why. Somewhere around the second hour, a couple walked past them with a small child on a bicycle, training wheels rattling against the pavement. The kid was maybe 5, deeply committed to the project of going forward, face set with the concentration of someone defusing a bomb. He made it approximately 15 feet before the front wheel wobbled violently and the whole thing listed sideways into a parent's waiting hand. "Close," Elena said, mostly to herself. "Lily did this thing for about 2 weeks where she refused to use the training wheels," Damon said, watching the kid regroup and try again. "She said they were embarrassing. She was 5. I didn't know 5-year-olds understood the concept of embarrassing." "What happened?" "She fell 7 times in one afternoon and then told me, very calmly, that she was going to take a break and reassess." He paused. "She's been riding without them for a year." Elena looked at him. "She sounds like you." He opened his mouth to object and then realized he didn't have the argument ready. "Maybe," he said, "the thing where you do something until you figure it out and you don't ask for help in the middle." He looked at her. "I've met you twice." "I know," she said, simply, not backing down. He let it sit. "She's more stubborn than I am," he said finally. "And she's funnier, and she cries at commercials, which I've never done. So she has the emotional range on me." "Do you worry about her?" Elena asked. She seemed to be choosing words. Raising her alone. The things she's missing. He'd been asked versions of this question before, usually with a different kind of weight behind it. Pity, or the particular discomfort of people who didn't know how to account for the blank space where a mother should be. Elena asked it like someone who actually wanted to know the answer, not the reassuring version of it. Every day, he said. She has Mrs. Alvarez who loves her. She has Vince and his wife, who have her over enough that she knows their dog's name and feeding schedule. She has... He stopped. She has a lot of people who show up, but there's a particular kind of showing up that I can't manufacture. Elena nodded slowly. She understood what he meant. He could see that she did. Does she ask about her mother? She used to more. Now it comes in waves. Sometimes weeks go by and it doesn't come up. And then one night at dinner she'll say something like, "She asked me once whether her mom would have liked dragons or horses because she needed to know which team she was on." His voice came out mostly even. She said it was important information. Elena was quiet for a moment. What did you tell her? I said dragons, definitely. He paused. I have no idea if that's true. I made it up in the moment because Lily was looking at me like the answer mattered. And maybe that's... He stopped, something in his chest doing a particular thing it occasionally did. Maybe that's the thing I can't fix, that I'm filling in blanks that I can't actually fill. You're not filling them, Elena said. You're just making sure she knows they exist and that there's love around them. She paused. That's different. He looked at the water for a moment. That's a good thing to say, he said. I meant it, she said. I'm not good at saying things I don't mean. He believed her. She met Vince on a Wednesday evening, accidentally, when Damon had miscalculated the overlap between a post-work drink with Vince and a plan to meet Elena for dinner 2 blocks away, and Vince had invited himself along in the manner of a person who absolutely knew what he was doing. I just want to say hello, Vince said on the walk over. I'm not going to be weird about it. You're already being weird about it. I set this whole thing up. I deserve a cameo. Elena was waiting outside the restaurant when they arrived, and Vince, to his credit, managed a greeting that was almost normal for a full 45 seconds before he visibly gave up on containing himself. He texted me, "Thank you," the night of your date, Vince said. He has never thanked me for anything in 15 years of friendship. I need you to understand what a seismic event that was. Vince, Damon said, I'm not embarrassing you. I'm providing context. Elena looked at Damon. Something about the way she looked at him, just a small, quick appraisal, checking whether he was actually mortified or just performing it, broke slightly into a smile. He did mention you, she said to Vince. He said you're very confident for someone who bills by the hour. Vince pointed at Damon. I like her. I know, Damon said. Go away. Vince went away, turning back once to give a thumbs up that Damon refused to acknowledge. Inside the restaurant, Elena slid into the booth across from him, unwinding her coat, and she was still smiling. A different smile than the careful ones she'd been offering, more unguarded, the kind that came from something genuinely catching her off guard. He really did that, she said. He really did that. Do you have other friends or just Vince? I have colleagues, he said. She raised an eyebrow. I have a few people, he said. I don't collect people. I have a small number that I trust, and I'm not good at expanding that number. Is that a warning? He thought about it. Maybe a description. She nodded, the same way she'd absorbed other things he'd said about himself. Without judgment, without rushing to fix it. He'd noticed she did that. Let information land before she responded to it. It was a rare quality. Most people were already preparing their reply before you'd finished the sentence. I have Priya, she said, and 2 other people from before the accident who stuck around, and a woman at work named Dolores who is 63 and has the energy of someone who hasn't slept in 30 years in the best possible way. She paused. I've also gotten good at being alone, maybe too good. What does too good look like? Like I stopped expecting people to stay, she said, even and quiet. Which sounds more dramatic than it is. It's practical mostly, but sometimes practical and sad are the same shape, and they're hard to tell apart from the inside. He held that. You said you almost didn't come that first day. I almost don't come to a lot of things, she said. I'm working on it. A beat. Coming today was easier than that day. Why? She looked at him across the table. Because I already know you won't make a face. He understood what she meant. Not just the scar, all of it. The careful parts of her, the places where she'd learned to apologize before anything had gone wrong. She meant she already knew he was paying attention to the real thing. I won't, he said. I know, she said. No. And the way she said it, not like a hope, but like something she'd already tested and found solid, made something in him go very quiet and very certain at the same time. 3 weeks in, she met Lily. This was not planned. It was not a milestone Damon had arranged with the ceremonial weight it probably deserved. It happened because on a Sunday afternoon he and Lily were at a farmer's market in Lincoln Square that Lily had been promised as a reward for tolerating 2 hours of indoor errands, and Elena was there buying something from a herb vendor, and they almost walked directly into each other in the aisle between the cheese stand and the apple cider booth. Lily saw her first. Lily always saw things first. Hi, Lily said, stopping dead in front of Elena with the unfiltered directness of someone who'd never learned that social hesitation existed. Your coat has a missing button. Elena looked down at her coat. The second button was indeed missing, leaving a small loop of thread. It does, she said. I keep forgetting to fix it. My dad forgets things too, Lily said, completely without judgment. He forgot where he put my lunch bag for a week, and it turned out it was in the car. Lily, Damon said. That's a true story, Lily said. Elena looked at Damon with the expression of someone who was physically restraining laughter. Elena, he said, with some effort at composure, this is my daughter Lily. Lily, this is my friend Elena. Lily studied Elena with the focused, unsentimental attention of a child conducting an evaluation. Her eyes moved to the scar, the way children's eyes do, direct and without malice, before the adult world teaches them to look away. And she said, Does that hurt? The market crowd moved around them. Damon held his breath. Elena crouched down to Lily's level. Not anymore, she said. It used to, but now it's just there, like a freckle, sort of, just bigger. I have a freckle on my elbow, Lily said. I named it Gerald. That's an excellent name for a freckle. I thought so. Lily seemed to complete whatever internal assessment she'd been running. Do you want to see the cider donuts? They're over there, and they're the real reason we're here, even though Dad said we came for vegetables. Lily, we didn't actually need the vegetables that badly. Elena looked up at Damon, still crouched at Lily's level, and her eyes were bright in a way he didn't have a word for. She stood. I would love to see the cider donuts, she said. And that was that. Gone. They walked through the market for the better part of an hour, which was not what anyone had planned. Lily narrated the market with the comprehensive authority of someone who'd been once before and considered that sufficient expertise, which apple varieties were acceptable, Honeycrisp, non-negotiable, which were suspect, anything with red in the name, under unspecified charges, why the cheese vendor with the green awning was superior to the one with the yellow awning. The samples are bigger, obviously. Elena listened to all of it with the kind of attention that wasn't polite and wasn't performed. It was actually interested, and Lily, who had excellent radar for the difference, responded to it by becoming more of herself, which was an alarming amount. Damon watched this from approximately 6 inches to the left and felt something happening in his chest that he'd been trying not to feel too soon. At the cider donut stand, Lily got powdered sugar on her chin and didn't notice. Elena noticed and said nothing, which was somehow the exactly right call. On the walk back to where Damon had parked the car, Lily took Elena's hand, just reached up and took it, the way children do when they've decided someone is trustworthy, as if trust were a simple thing you could feel through the palm of your hand. Elena looked straight ahead when it happened, but her grip closed around Lily's fingers and she didn't let go. Damon watched them walk ahead of him for a moment. He told himself to breathe. He breathed. At the car, Lily climbed in the back seat and immediately started explaining something about the stuffed animals to herself, having apparently processed Elena as a settled matter. Damon stood at the driver's side door. I'm sorry, he said quietly to Elena. I didn't plan that. Don't apologize, she said. He heard it back in his own voice. She'd heard it too. There was a small wry lift at the corner of her mouth. I mean it, she said. That was... She stopped. She asked me if the scar hurt, and I've been asked that by adults in ways that made me feel like a specimen under glass. But when she asked it, she paused. It wasn't a big deal. It was just a question. She doesn't have a filter, he said. She has a better filter than most adults, Elena said. She asked the thing she actually wanted to know, and then she moved on. That's not a bad filter. That's a good one. He looked at her. She was standing on the sidewalk in the October afternoon with powdered sugar on the sleeve of her coat that had come from Lily's donut, and she hadn't noticed either. He thought about pointing it out. He didn't. Can I call you tonight? He asked. She looked at him for a moment, something shifting behind her eyes. Careful, still, but less careful than it had been that first day in the coffee shop. Yeah, she said. You can call me tonight. Sit. She had a hard week that fourth week, and she didn't hide it. Tuesday night she called him instead of waiting, earlier than she usually would have, and her voice when he picked up was flat in a way he'd learned to pay attention to, the flatness that meant she'd used up the energy it took to sound fine. We lost a contract today, she said. Not the organization. A personal one. A woman I've been working with for 6 months. Her name is Diane. She was 47, she'd been in warehouse work before a back injury cost her the job, and we'd gotten her into a medical coding certification program, and she was almost there. Elena stopped. She has to move. Her landlord sold the building. The new rent is... She can't do it, and she can't afford to relocate and stay in the program, and there's a waiting list for the housing assistance, and it's... A long breath. It's one of those moments where the system just grinds someone up, and you watch it happen, and there's nothing you can do. Damon sat on the edge of his bed in the dark. Where is she going? Her sister's, in Milwaukee. She's going to try to find a program there, but the certification she's halfway through doesn't transfer directly, which means she'd probably have to start over, and she's... Elena's voice got quiet. She's not going to start over. I know she won't. Not because she's not strong enough, because you can only restart so many times before it starts costing you something you can't get back. You sound like you know that from the inside. A pause. I do, she said. He waited. She didn't say more for a moment, and he didn't push. Outside his window, the city made its usual nighttime sounds. A cab, the distant rhythm of something on the street, wind against the glass. After the accident, she said finally, I had to leave my apartment. I couldn't work. I was burning through savings, and my parents... We're not close. We weren't close before either, but the accident made it clear in a way I couldn't avoid anymore that I wasn't going to get what I needed from that direction. Her voice was careful. Not fragile, careful, which was different. I couch surfed for a while, which sounds casual but is exhausting in a way that gets into your bones. You're always slightly in someone else's way. You can't be sick, you can't be sad, you have to be grateful every minute, or you feel like a burden, and I was in pain and I was sad and I was dealing with what my face looked like, and I had nowhere to put any of it. Where did you go? A women's shelter eventually, for 3 months. She said it plainly, without self-pity or armor. I hated it, and I'm grateful for it in equal measure. And when I finally got stable, got a job, got a room in a shared apartment, got on my feet, I thought, okay, this is the thing I'm supposed to do something with. Not because it's inspiring or poetic, just because I understand how people get stuck in those systems and don't get out. And that felt like the most honest thing I could offer. Damon was quiet for a moment. Elena, he said. I know, she said. That's a lot. Stop saying that. A breath. Old habit. I'm glad you told me, he said. And then, because it was true and she deserved to hear the true version, you've been carrying that so carefully the whole time since the first day. It's not a sad story, she said. I mean, parts of it are, but I'm okay. I'm actually okay. I know you are, he said. That's not what I was saying. She was quiet. I was saying, he said carefully, that you don't have to carry it so carefully around me anymore. If you don't want to. Another long quiet. Outside, the city, the wind. Okay, she said, very softly. I'm going to try to practice that. Take your time, he said. He heard her exhale. It was the sound of a weight shifted. They talked for another hour and a half about nothing consequential. A show she was watching, a meeting he had to run in the morning, whether congee was better with ginger or without. Ginger, she said firmly, and he was in no position to argue. When she said goodnight, her voice was different than when she'd called. Not fixed, just lighter. The way things get when you've said them out loud and they don't collapse anything. He lay in the dark after she hung up and looked at the ceiling for a while. He thought about Diane in Milwaukee, about Lily asking if the scar hurt, about Elena on the concrete edge of the Riverwalk with a paper cup in both hands, watching the water like she had all the time in the world and was in no hurry to need anything from it. He thought about the way she'd said, "I'm actually okay." The particular emphasis on actually, like she was still sometimes surprised to find it true. He fell asleep with his phone still on his chest. In her apartment across the city, Elena sat on the edge of her bed for a moment after she hung up. She looked at her hands. She thought about Damon's voice saying, "You don't have to carry it so carefully around me anymore." She thought about how long it had been since someone had offered her something she hadn't known she needed until she heard the words. She turned off the light. She did not, for the first time in a very long time, feel like the next day was something to brace for. The 5th week was when things started to get complicated, which maybe shouldn't have surprised either of them. It started on a Thursday evening when Damon had a work event. Not a gala, not anything with a red carpet, just a quarterly dinner with a group of investors and partners that Cross Group had been cultivating for 2 years. The kind of dinner where the food was excellent and the conversation was exhausting and every word carried approximately 3 times its stated meaning. He went to 40 or 50 of these a year. He was good at them the way some people are good at things they don't particularly enjoy, efficiently, without waste. He'd mentioned the dinner to Elena the night before in passing. She'd asked the way she sometimes asked about his work, with genuine curiosity, but without the fawning quality he'd gotten used to from people who wanted proximity to what he represented. She'd asked what the dinner was for, and he'd explained, and she'd said, "That sounds incredibly draining," which was both accurate and something no one had ever said to him about it before. The dinner ran late. By the time he was in the car heading home, it was close to 11, and he was tired in the specific way that came not from physical exertion, but from 3 hours of being precisely what the situation required and nothing else. He texted Elena when he got in the car, "Just finished, heading home," and she replied with a small thumbs up, which he knew meant she'd probably been half asleep already. He should have gone home. He did go home. He put Lily to bed. She'd been up reading with Mrs. Alvarez, who had the unflappable patience of someone who'd raised 4 children of her own and found Lily's chaotic energy charming rather than alarming. And then he sat in the kitchen and did the thing he occasionally did after these dinners, which was open his laptop and try to decompress by working for an hour. At 11:40, his phone rang. Not Elena. His sister, Catherine. Catherine Cross was 3 years older than Damon, lived in New York, and had her mother's ability to sense inconvenient timing from 800 miles away. She called every 2 or 3 weeks, usually on evenings when Damon had just found his equilibrium. "I heard from Mom that you've been seeing someone," she said, without preamble. He could hear the city behind her. Catherine was never indoors when she could help it. "Hello to you, too." "She says Vince told her." "Vince needs a new hobby." "Damon." Her voice shifted into the register she used when she was being sincere, which was distinct from her normal register and somewhat more alarming. "I'm not calling to give you a hard time. I'm calling because Mom is going to call you, and I wanted to warn you first." He sat back in his chair. "What did she say?" "She said she was glad you were moving on." A pause. "And then she said she hoped you were being practical." He knew exactly what that meant. Their mother, Margaret Cross, was not a cruel woman. She was a woman who'd married into old money, then watched her son make significantly more of it, and had developed over the years a particular orientation toward the world that treated practical as the highest compliment and impulsive as a category of moral failure. "She doesn't know anything about Elena," Damon said. She knows she's not. Catherine stopped, and he could hear her choosing her words, which meant she was about to deliver someone else's words carefully enough to maintain deniability. She knows she's not from your world, and Mom worries. About Lily, about stability. Lily met Elena 3 weeks ago and immediately adopted her, Damon said, keeping his voice level. And the idea that Elena is some kind of stability risk is, I'm not saying that. Mom is implying it. There's a difference, and I need you to hear the difference. He was quiet for a moment. She's going to call you, Catherine said again. Probably this weekend. I just wanted you to not be blindsided. I appreciate it, he said, meaning it part way. After he hung up, he sat in the kitchen for a while, not working. He thought about his mother, who had opinions about most things, and delivered them in the gentle, inexorable way of someone who believed they were doing you a favor. He thought about what practical meant in her vocabulary. Connections, appearance, the kind of soft social math that his world ran on whether anyone admitted it or not. He thought about Elena in her too large green coat, apologizing for being 2 minutes late when she was on time. He went to bed. He didn't sleep particularly well. His mother called on Saturday afternoon while Lily was at a birthday party, and Damon had exactly 2 hours to himself, which he'd been planning to use to answer emails and instead spent on the phone with Margaret Cross for 45 minutes. His mother was good at making concern sound like love, because she believed it was. That was the complicated part. She wasn't performing worry. She genuinely experienced it, had always experienced it, in a constant low-frequency signal directed at everyone she loved. When she asked about Elena, her voice was warm and careful, and she said all the right things in sequence. I just want you to be happy. I know it's been a long road. Lily deserves stability. And underneath all of it was the thing she couldn't quite say directly, which was that she'd spent years imagining a particular shape for Damon's life and wasn't sure how to adjust the picture. Tell me about her, his mother said. She works in workforce development. She's intelligent and she's kind and she makes Lily laugh. And Vince said she's had some difficulties. Damon's jaw tightened slightly. Everyone's had difficulties, Mom. Of course, I didn't mean... A small pause. I just want to make sure that you're thinking clearly. You've always had a tendency to want to fix things. I'm not trying to fix anyone. I know you believe that. And there it was, said so gently, the most effective form of undermining, the kind that arrived wearing the face of care. Mom, he said, and his voice was measured the way it got when he was controlling it more than he wanted to. I'm going to ask you to trust my judgment on this. Can you do that? A pause. Of course. She didn't mean of course the way he'd asked, but the conversation moved on into Lily and the company and Catherine's new apartment in Brooklyn, and by the time he hung up, the 45 minutes had cost him something he didn't have a precise name for. He sat with his phone in his hand for a while. He thought about calling Elena. He didn't, because he wasn't sure he could do it without some of the frustration leaking through, and he didn't want to have that conversation while he was still inside the feeling. He had enough self-awareness to know that he wasn't always good at separating the shape of one thing from the shape of another when he was tired and annoyed. He made a cup of coffee instead. He sat at the kitchen window and drank it and watched the street below and tried to organize his thoughts into something manageable. The problem, and he knew it was a problem, was that his mother wasn't entirely wrong about the part she hadn't said. Not about Elena. About him. He had a tendency, he'd always had it, to see something broken and move toward it rather than away, to organize himself around solving things, to conflate care with the act of fixing. Caroline had called it his God complex, not unkindly. She'd said it the way you name something in someone you love so they can see it. He'd spent years arguing with that characterization and eventually came to understand she was right in the specific way that the people who know you best are right about the things you most resist hearing. He was not trying to fix Elena. He was sure of that. He was mostly sure of that. He picked up his phone and texted Vince, "Please stop telling my mother things." Vince replied in 40 seconds. In my defense, I was ambushed at a cocktail party. Then, "Is everything okay?" Damon looked at that for a moment, then typed, "I don't know yet." He didn't tell Elena about the phone call, not that day, not the next. He told himself it wasn't relevant. It was his family's issue, his mother's fear, not something Elena needed to carry. He believed that, or tried to. But something had shifted, very slightly, in the way he was present when they talked. He noticed it before she did. He was slightly more in his head. He was, and he hated this, slightly more cautious. Elena noticed on the following Tuesday. They'd been on the phone after dinner, the easy kind of call they'd been having, the ones that started with something specific and drifted. And she'd been telling him about a participant in her program who'd gotten a job offer, a real one, full-time, with benefits, which was the kind of news that her organization ran on. And she'd been mid-sentence when she stopped. "You're somewhere else," she said. "I'm here." Damon. He was quiet for a second too long. "What happened?" she asked. Not accusatory, not anxious, just asking. He thought about deflecting. He was good at it, had years of practice moving conversations away from things he didn't want to hold still. But Elena had sat across from him in a coffee shop 6 weeks ago and said the most difficult things about herself in a voice that didn't flinch. And he'd asked her to stop carrying things carefully around him, and he had some obligation to honor that in both directions. "My mother called," he said. A brief pause. "About?" "About you. About us. About whether I'm being—" He stopped. She used the word practical. Silence on the other end. "I'm not going to apologize for her," he said. "She means well, and she's still wrong, and I told her to trust my judgment." What did she say about me specifically? He knew she was asking for the version he hadn't softened. She implied that I have a tendency to be drawn to people who need help, and that she wondered if I was thinking clearly. Elena didn't say anything for a long moment. "Elena, I'm here," she said. Her voice was controlled in a way that it sometimes was when she was processing something at a speed she didn't want to show. "What she said isn't what I think," he said. "I need you to know that." "I know." And then, quietly, "But it's the thing I think about myself. That's the problem." There it was, the thing underneath. "You think I'm here because I feel sorry for you," he said. Not a question. "I think," she exhaled, "I think it's possible that you're a person who is drawn to a certain kind of situation, and that I'm—" She stopped. "I'm not a project, Damon. I've worked very hard not to be someone's project, and I don't think you see me that way. I don't. But the fact that your mother said it means that the question exists, and once I know the question exists, I can't unknow it." "That's fair," he said. "I'm not trying to—" "No, I mean it. That's fair." He said it steadily. "I've thought about it too, because I know myself well enough to know that I do move toward things I want to be useful to. I know I do that. And I've been asking myself whether that's what this is. And it's not," he said, "but I understand why you need more than me saying that." Another quiet. The city sounds in the background of both their phones, 8 blocks apart. "What do you need from me?" he asked. She made a small sound, not quite a laugh, not quite anything else. "I don't know," she said. "I'm not good at knowing what I need. I'm better at knowing what I don't. Tell me what you don't." "I don't want to be managed," she said. "I don't want to be a story you tell about yourself. I don't want to get to 6 months or 8 months or a year and realize that the way you looked at me was—" She stopped. "Was the way people look at something they feel good about helping, rather than—" She didn't finish the sentence. "Rather than something they can't imagine not having," he said. Silence. "Yeah," she said very quietly. "Then I need you to give me the chance to show you the difference," he said. "I know I can't argue you into believing it. That's not how it works. But I need the room to actually show you." A long, careful pause. "Okay," she said, finally. "Okay." They stayed on the phone another 20 minutes without saying much, but the staying mattered. He understood that. Sometimes the fact that you don't hang up is its own kind of answer. The thing about Elena was that she didn't collapse when things were difficult. She went quiet, which some people mistook for fragility, but was actually the opposite. She processed internally, ran the thing through whatever she had inside, and came out the other side with a decision already made. He'd seen it enough times now to recognize the shape of it. What he hadn't expected was her showing up at a decision that went against her own instinct for self-protection. She called him Thursday morning, which was unusual. He was between meetings and almost didn't pick up, and then saw her name and stepped into the hallway. "I've been thinking," she said without preamble. About the thing your mother said, and the thing I said." A pause. "And I think I've been doing something I said I didn't want to do." "What's that?" "Auditing you," she said. "Looking for the version of you that matches the thing I'm afraid of. And that's," she exhaled, "that's not fair to you, and it's not who I want to be." He leaned against the hallway wall. Outside a conference room, someone was having a phone call in a raised voice about freight scheduling. The building hummed with its usual frequency. "I've been hurt enough times," Elena continued, "that I developed this thing where I see the threat before it exists. And sometimes that's useful, but sometimes it means I'm standing in something real, and I'm so busy watching the door for trouble that I'm not actually here." He didn't say anything immediately. "I'm here," she said. "I want to be here." He felt something in his chest release a tension he hadn't fully known he was holding. "I'm glad," he said. "Me too." "Okay." A breath. "I have to get back to work." "Yeah, me too." "Damon?" "Yeah." "Tell your mother I said hello." A pause. "I'm kidding. Please don't do that." He laughed, the genuine kind, in the hallway outside the freight scheduling argument. "Noted," he said. It was Lily who nearly broke something irreparably, completely by accident, on a Saturday afternoon in November. She did it the way children do things, with total transparency and zero awareness of the damage, like dropping a glass in the middle of a room and looking at the pieces with genuine curiosity about what had just happened. The three of them had spent the afternoon at a natural history museum, which had been Lily's choice and Lily's campaign, sustained over 4 days of low-grade lobbying that eventually wore Damon down the way water wears down rock. Lily wanted to see the dinosaur exhibit, specifically the T-Rex. More specifically, she'd read, God only knew where, that the museum had recently re-articulated their T-Rex skeleton, and she had opinions about this that she needed to verify in person. Elena had come along with the easy naturalness that had been developing for weeks now, the way she'd started fitting into the edges of their days without anyone formally inviting her to or formally marking when it began. She and Lily had developed their own thing, a sideways friendship conducted mostly through Lily monologuing and Elena asking questions that made Lily feel like her opinions were worth having, which they were, but she wasn't used to adults who consistently acted like they were. The museum was exactly what it should have been: crowded, too warm, smelling of old wood and institutional carpet. The dinosaur hall was spectacular, and Lily was in a state of focused reverence that Damon had only previously seen her direct at Birthday Cake and the dragon in How to Train Your Dragon. They were standing in front of the T-Rex, which Lily had spent 4 minutes circling in silence, a sign of serious respect, when a woman appeared beside them. Mid-40s, well-dressed, the kind of person who navigated museum crowds with the confidence of someone accustomed to having space. She smiled at Damon in the way people occasionally smiled at him when they recognized him, but were trying to appear like they weren't sure, which was a specific and unconvincing expression. "Damon Cross," she said, settling it. He turned. Serena Albright. He knew her peripherally. She sat on 2 boards that adjacent to his own, and her family had been in Chicago real estate for generations. Pleasant enough. He'd never had a problem with her. "Serena," he said, shaking her hand. She glanced at Elena in the way some people did, a quick involuntary scan that registered the scar and then moved with almost practiced normalcy back to Damon's face. Elena had seen it. She always saw it. But what happened next was Serena bending down slightly to Lily and saying, with genuine warmth, "You must be Lily. Your father talks about you constantly." "I know," Lily said. Serena laughed. "And is this?" She gestured at Elena, pleasantly enough, the gesture completing the sentence it didn't finish. "This is Elena," Damon said. Elena? Serena repeated, the social smile in place. Are you a family friend? The question was benign. Probably. And yet the word family landed at an angle, and the way she'd asked it, with that particular inflection that distinguished friend of the family from person who matters, was a distinction that someone like Elena would catch, because she'd been catching versions of it her whole life. Damon was already opening his mouth to answer when Lily, fully absorbed in looking at the tea, Rex and half listening to the adult conversation the way children do, taking in more than you realize, said without looking away from the dinosaur, Elena's not a family friend. She's Dad's girlfriend. A brief, charged silence. Elena went very still beside him. Serena's expression shifted into something warm and congratulatory. Oh, how wonderful, she said. How long have you— Excuse us for just a moment, Damon said, and the sentence came out in his board meeting voice, which closed the conversation without room for argument. He touched Lily's shoulder. Lil, say goodbye to Mrs. Albright. Goodbye, Lily said, already moving toward the next display. He nodded at Serena, who was gracious enough to take the exit without making anything of it, and then he was walking, one hand loosely on Lily's back, Elena a half step to his right. He didn't look at her immediately. He was calibrating. He knew that the way he handled the next 4 minutes would matter. He steered them to a bench in the adjacent hall, fish fossils, no one particularly interested, and Lily immediately pulled out the museum map she'd been folding and unfolding all afternoon, beginning a navigation project of some kind. Damon looked at Elena. Her face was composed, but barely. She was doing the thing where she kept it together in front of Lily, and he could see the exact amount of effort that cost her. Hey, he said, quietly enough that Lily wasn't paying attention. Are you okay? I'm fine, she said, which was not the same thing. Elena. She looked at him. She called me your girlfriend, she said, low, and I froze. Which is, I know it's a label, I know it shouldn't matter, but we haven't said it. And that woman was looking at me and Lily just said it, and She stopped. I don't know what I am, she said. To you. I know what it feels like, but I don't know what it is. He held her gaze. What do you want it to be? That's not fair, she said. I asked first. It was such an Elena thing to say. The logic of it, the mild absurdity, that something in his face moved against his will. You're not a family friend, he said. I heard. You're the person I want to call after things, he said. You're the person I think about when something happens and I need to say it to someone. You're the person Lily looks for when we're somewhere together, which she doesn't do with people she's indifferent to. He paused. Yes, what Lily said. Elena looked at him for a long moment. Her jaw was doing the slight tightness it did when she was feeling more than she was ready to say. Okay, she said. Okay, he said. Then, I should have said it more formally, before a 7-year-old announced it in a museum. She really did just say it, Elena said, and there was something wavering in her voice that was not quite a laugh. In front of the T-Rex, he said. In front of the T-Rex. She exhaled slowly. I don't know whether to find that perfect or horrifying. Both, he said. I've found that's usually the answer with her. From 2 feet away, Lily looked up from the map. Are we having a moment? She asked, with the directness of someone who wanted the situation assessed. We're having a conversation, Damon said. It looks like a moment, Lily said, and went back to the map. Elena put her hand over her mouth. Her shoulders were shaking slightly. He watched her, the laugh breaking through despite everything, the eyes bright and wet at the same time, the way she was all of it at once, shaken and relieved and slightly absurd and present. She's impossible, Elena said. She is, he said. She gets it from her father. On the drive home, Lily fell asleep in the back seat with the museum map still in her hand, which was something she did with the sudden totality of a power outage. One moment she'd been narrating something about the Jurassic period, and then there was silence, and then quiet breathing. Elena sat in the passenger seat watching the city go by. November had fully arrived in Chicago, stripped the last of the trees, pressed the sky down low and gray. She liked the city this time of year, which was a minority opinion she'd always held. The way it turned inward, got less showy, became about the people who decided to stay. "Can I ask you something?" she said, keeping her voice low. "Yeah," Damon said. "What do you actually want?" She looked at him. "Not what you think is right, not the practical version. What do you actually want when you're not thinking about how it looks?" He was quiet for a moment. Outside, the city moved past the windows. "I want to not be alone in the particular way I've been alone," he said, and his voice was simpler than his usual register, stripped of the polish. "I want Lily to grow up watching something that looks like, that actually is, people choosing each other, not performing it." He paused. "And I want it to be you. That's not complicated for me, Elena. It's actually one of the less complicated things in my life." She looked at him for a long time. "I don't know how to do this perfectly," she said. "I want you to know that up front. I've spent so many years learning to need less that I don't always know when I actually need something, and I'll probably get it wrong sometimes and not say things I should say and say things at the wrong time." "That's accurate for me too," he said. "The calendar of it will just be different." She looked back out the window. In the back seat, Lily made a small sound in her sleep and resettled, the map crinkling slightly in her hand. "Okay," Elena said. "Okay?" She turned back to him, and the streetlights were coming on now in the early dark, moving across her face one by one, and she looked at him directly in the way she'd looked at him that first afternoon in the coffee shop, searching for the thing behind the surface, making sure what she saw was real, deciding whether to trust it. "I'm in," she said. "Completely. I'm in." He didn't say anything, but something in how he held his shoulders shifted, very slightly, like a thing that had been braced against a possibility had stopped needing to be. They drove through the city in the early dark, toward home. December arrived in Chicago the way it always did. Without apology, without transition, just a hard drop in temperature overnight that made the city pull itself inward and the lake go dark and restless. The Christmas lights went up on Michigan Avenue, and the wind off the water developed an edge that cut through anything less than a proper coat, and people stopped making eye contact on the street because keeping your face down was a survival strategy. Elena noticed the cold more than most people. She always had, after the accident. Something about the nerve damage along her jaw and neck made low temperatures register differently on the left side of her face. A kind of heightened sensitivity that wasn't painful exactly, but was present in a way she couldn't ignore. She'd learned to dress for it, layer scarves, keep her left side angled slightly away from wind. Small accommodations, the kind that became invisible once you'd been doing them long enough. She'd stopped hiding the scarf from Damon somewhere around week 5. She wasn't sure when exactly. There wasn't a moment she could point to, a decision she'd consciously made. It was more like the scarf gradually migrated from a barrier to just an item of clothing. He'd never once looked at her left side with the particular expression she was trained to recognize, the rapid recalibration that happened behind people's eyes when they encountered something unexpected. He just looked at her. All of her, unremarkably, the way you look at someone you're paying attention to. That sounds simple. It was not simple. It had taken her until the 3rd week to stop waiting for it. They were 2 months in when the first external crack appeared, not in what they were to each other, but in the world around it, the part neither of them could fully control. It started with a photograph. Damon had taken her to a benefit dinner in early December. Not the kind of dinner he went to for work, those he could navigate alone without thinking twice. This was a charity event for a children's literacy organization that Vince's wife, Julia, co-chaired, which meant Vince and Julia would be there, and it was less an obligation than an actual evening he'd agreed to. He'd asked Elena if she wanted to come, and she'd said yes after a brief pause that he'd noticed and hadn't commented on. She'd worn a dark blue dress and her hair down, which she rarely did, and she'd looked at herself in the bathroom mirror for approximately 4 minutes before deciding she was done looking and going to find her shoes. The scar was visible. She knew it was visible. She'd thought about the scarf and then put it down because she'd made a decision somewhere in the previous 2 months that she was not going to perform invisibility for rooms full of strangers anymore. And she was going to hold herself to that even when holding herself to it felt like walking into cold water. The dinner was fine, mostly. The room was full of the kind of people who occupied Damon's professional world. Well-dressed, socially precise, the sort of crowd that had perfected the art of appearing warm while remaining fundamentally appraising. Vince and Julia were easy and genuine, which helped. Julia was a compact, energetic woman who had a law degree she'd stopped using to raise 2 kids and run 3 charitable boards, and she'd put her hand on Elena's arm within 4 minutes of meeting her and said, "Vince told me you work in workforce development. I've been trying to get someone on our steering committee who actually understands barriers to adult literacy. Can we talk?" And she'd meant it. Elena could tell within a sentence that Julia was a person who didn't say things she didn't mean, and they talked for 20 minutes at the bar before dinner while Vince and Damon stood nearby, not quite pretending they weren't relieved. The event photographer circulated through the room, the kind of professional presence at these things that everyone registered and mostly forgot about. At some point in the evening, in the middle of a conversation about Julia's committee, a flashbulb went off at an angle, and Elena heard the particular brief sound of a camera shutter, and she had the brief awareness that she was in the frame. She forgot about it. The photograph appeared on the charity's social media page 2 days later. Someone on the charity's staff sent Damon a link because he was tagged. It was a standard event photo, a cluster of people at a dinner, glasses in hand, mid-conversation, and Elena was visible on the left side of the frame, turned slightly toward Julia, the scar along her jaw fully visible. She looked, in the photo, like a person at a dinner, which is what she was. The comments were the problem. Not most of them. Most of them were the standard event photo responses. Compliments, tagged names, variations on looks like a wonderful evening. But there were others. Nested in the thread, shared into adjacent spaces, the kind of comments that lived in the specific ecosystem of people who had opinions about public figures and the women associated with them. Is that his girlfriend? Who is she? She has a scar on her face. That's who the Cross guy is dating? She's brave for going out looking like that, honestly. Damon Cross downgraded LOL. Elena found them before Damon did. Not because she was looking, she wasn't. She'd forgotten the photo existed. She found them because her friend Priya texted her a screenshot at 7:30 in the morning with the message, "Don't spiral, okay? It's idiots on the internet. But I wanted you to see it from me first." Elena read the comments sitting on the edge of her bed in the early morning. She read them 3 times, which was 2 times too many. But you don't always have control over the thing you do when someone opens a wound you thought had closed. She put her phone face down on the mattress. She sat there for a while. She was familiar with the particular quality of this kind of cruelty. Public, casual, delivered by people who weren't thinking of it as cruelty, but as observation. She'd encountered versions of it her whole adult life, in smaller and larger measures. She'd learned, mostly, not to let it dictate the terms of how she moved through the world. She'd gotten genuinely better at it. But better and immune were different things, and the comment that stayed with her, the one she couldn't shake, sitting on the edge of her bed, wasn't the meanest one. It was, "She's brave for going out looking like that." Because bravery implied a choice. It implied she'd weighed the options and decided the risk of being seen was worth it, which meant her being in a room was an act that required justification. She picked her phone back up. She did not text Damon. She texted Priya. "I'm okay. Thank you for telling me." Then she got up and made coffee and got ready for work and went, which was what she did with hard things. She went anyway. Damon found the comments at 9:15 when Marcus forwarded him the charity's post because his name was tagged and Marcus monitored his mentions. He read them the way he read most things, quickly, then slowly, then with the particular cold focus that was his version of anger. He called Elena at 9:20. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey." "You saw them," he said. A beat. "Yes." "Why didn't you call me?" "Because—" She stopped. "Because I needed to sit with it for a minute before I handed it to you. It's not yours to fix." He pulled that apart. "Elena, I'm okay," she said, and the way she said it was different from the reflexive "I'm fine" he'd learned to read as a signal of the opposite. She meant this one. Mostly. "I've been here before. Not this specific version, but this territory. I know how to move through it. The organization is going to take the post down. I already called." "Don't," she said. Damon, don't have the post taken down. Why not? Because then the story becomes you protecting me from the internet, and I don't want that story. I don't want to be the woman who needs her billionaire boyfriend to scrub bad comments off the internet. I'll handle my own feelings about it. He was quiet for a second. I'm not trying to manage you. I'm angry. I know you're angry. Actually, thank you for that. But the anger is yours. The thing I need to deal with is mine. A pause. I'm not pushing you away. I need to be the person who deals with this, not someone it happens to. He sat with that. It was a hard thing to sit with when everything in him wanted to do something. But he'd been paying attention for 2 months, and he knew the difference between Elena asking for help and Elena telling him what she needed, and this was the second one. Okay, he said. Can I be angry with you? Just at the same time without doing anything about it? Something in her voice shifted. Yeah, she said. You can do that. Good. Because I am. That's not acceptable. I know. A brief quiet. It's also not new. People have said worse to my face. That doesn't make it acceptable. No, she said. It doesn't. But it makes it navigable, which is what I need it to be right now. He exhaled slowly. What do you need from me today? She considered it. He could hear her thinking, which he'd learned was a specific quality of silence. Nothing dramatic, she said. Just be normal tonight. Call me the way you would have. Don't make this the whole thing. Okay, he said. I can do that. And Damon? Yeah. Thank you for being angry, she said. That matters. It really does. He called that night the way he would have. They talked about her day, a participant who'd gotten a second interview, a staff meeting that had run 40 minutes over its scheduled time for reasons no one could fully explain, and about Lily, who had announced that she wanted to be a paleontologist for Christmas, which had required a 15-minute clarification process to establish that this was a career aspiration and not a gift request. They didn't talk about the comments, not directly, but the call was long, and it stayed on the line past the point where either of them had anything specific left to say, which was the point. The stain itself was what it meant. 3 days later, Elena ran into something she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't online. It was in person, which was almost harder. She'd stopped at a coffee shop near her office, not Ember and Compre, just the place on the corner with the reliable Wi-Fi and the adequate espresso. And she was in line behind 2 women she didn't know, and she heard her name. Or not her name, she heard her. Heard herself being discussed, recognized from a photograph, in a conversation that the 2 women were having with the casual ease of people who'd decided the subject wasn't present in any meaningful way. The woman in that photo with Damon Cross, I saw it circulating. I know, I feel bad for her, honestly. I don't think Elena stepped out of the line. She didn't make a scene. She just turned and walked out of the coffee shop and stood on the sidewalk in the December cold and breathed for a minute. I feel bad for her, said with perfect sincerity, said by someone who thought they were being kind. That was the one that broke through. Not the cruelty which she had armor for, but the pity, which she didn't. Not because pity was worse than contempt, but because pity was what happened when someone looked at your life and concluded it was less than what a person deserved. And Elena had spent years building something out of the wreckage of what had happened to her, carefully, imperfectly, one decision at a time. She had a job that mattered. She had Priya. She had an apartment that was hers, with a window that got morning light, and she made congee from scratch at 10:30 at night when she needed something to be concrete and real. She had Damon. She had Lily reaching up for her hand at a farmer's market because Lily had decided she was trustworthy. She was not a person to feel sorry for. She stood on the sidewalk and felt the wrongness of the category she'd been placed in, felt it the way you feel an injustice that you don't have an immediate target for, which is one of the hardest kinds to hold. And then she did what she always did. She breathed. She went back inside. She got the coffee. But something had landed differently this time, and she knew it. She told Damon that night, not the edited version, but the actual one. The coffee shop, the 2 women, the I feel bad for her. She told him in the flat, factual way she told him things when she was still inside the feeling, because she'd been practicing saying things before she'd fully processed them, which was harder than it sounded. He didn't say I'm sorry, and he didn't say those people are idiots. He said, "What did you do after?" "I went back in and got the coffee," she said. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, that sounds right." "I'm angry," she said. "Not sad. I want you to know the difference. I'm not falling apart over this. I'm angry that I'm still being sorted into a category by strangers who think they know what my life is." "You should be angry." "I know I should be. I'm just also tired of being angry about the same thing for 10 years. He was quiet for a moment. "What would it take," he said carefully, "for you to believe, not because I'm saying it, but actually believe it, that the category those people put you in is wrong?" She opened her mouth and then closed it. "Not as a rhetorical question," he said. "Actually, what would it take?" She sat with it, longer than felt comfortable. "I don't know if it's something someone else can give me," she said finally. "I think it's something I have to decide. Every time. I know that sounds exhausting." "It sounds honest," he said. "It's both," she said. He didn't try to solve it. She'd half expected him to try. Damon's instinct was always toward resolution, toward the thing you could build or fix or make better, and she'd seen it enough times to recognize when he was pulling against it. He was pulling against it now. "Thank you for not telling me it gets better," she said. "I don't know if it does." "Neither do I," she said. "But I'm tired of people acting like they know." The conversation with Margaret Cross happened 4 days before Christmas, and Elena had not known it was coming. Damon's mother was in Chicago for a week. The family had a tradition of gathering at the apartment in the days before the holiday, something that had started with Caroline and that Damon had maintained without ever quite deciding to, the way you maintain rituals that have become load-bearing parts of the structure around someone's absence. Elena had known Margaret was coming. She'd known she and Damon hadn't figured out how to handle that overlap yet. They hadn't talked about it directly, which was itself a conversation they were avoiding, and both of them were aware they were avoiding it, and neither had pushed. What she hadn't expected was Margaret Cross calling her directly. She found Elena's number through Vince, which meant Vince was going to owe someone an apology. Elena wasn't sure who, but someone. The call came on a Tuesday morning while Elena was at her desk drafting grant language, and the name M. Cross on the screen meant nothing to her until the voice said, "Elena, this is Margaret Cross, Damon's mother." The silence that followed was very short but very complete. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," Margaret said. "No," Elena said, which was the automatic response, the one that came before the brain engaged. She was already moving toward the hallway, her office being too small and too thin-walled for whatever this was. "I wanted to speak with you before the holiday," Margaret said. Her voice was precise and warm in equal measure, which was an unsettling combination. "Damon doesn't know I'm calling. I imagine he'd prefer I hadn't." "What did you want to say?" Elena asked. She kept her voice level. She'd had years of practice keeping her voice level. "I want to say that I've been thinking about you a great deal," Margaret said. "Since Damon told me about you, I've thought about the way that conversation went and about what I implied, and I want to be direct." A pause. "I wasn't fair to you. I said things to my son that reflected badly on my own assumptions rather than on anything I actually knew about you." Elena was standing in the hallway outside her office. Dolores, from 3 doors down, passed with a stack of folders and gave her a curious look. Elena turned slightly toward the wall. "I appreciate that," Elena said carefully. "I'm not calling to welcome you to the family," Margaret said. "I want to be honest. I don't know you yet. I know you through what my son has told me, and I know what I saw in him when he talked about you, which was something I haven't seen from him in years. Whether that's your doing or simply time, I can't say." Another pause. "I also know that whatever I decided to believe about your situation without knowing you wasn't fair. And I'm old enough to know that unfairness I don't correct becomes the kind of thing I carry." Elena pressed her back against the wall. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What are you actually afraid of?" Elena said. "Not the practical version. What's the actual fear?" A silence. longer than she'd expected from a woman who seemed comfortable with most territory. That he'll choose something because it feels meaningful, Margaret said, finally, and find out too late that feeling meaningful and being right are different things. He's lost enough. The voice was still controlled, but the thing underneath it had shifted into something more human. He's not good at letting himself need things. He gives and doesn't ask for anything back, and I worry that someone could take advantage of that without even meaning to, just by needing. I don't need him to take care of me, Elena said. I want you to understand that. I have needed people to take care of me before, and it was humiliating, and I worked very hard to not be in that position again. Her voice was steady. She was making sure it was steady. I'm not with your son because he has money or because I need rescuing. I'm with him because he listened to me say something about myself that I've been ashamed of for years, and he looked at me like it didn't change anything. That's not common. That's not something you find twice. Quiet on the line. You're more direct than I expected, Margaret said. I've learned it's more efficient, Elena said. I spent a lot of years not being direct, and it cost me things I'm still paying for. A long pause. Then, surprising her. Would you be willing to have lunch? Before Christmas. Just us. Elena processed that. Does Damon know about this call? No. I'll tell him I talked to you. I expected you would, Margaret said, and there was something almost like approval in it. So, lunch? Elena looked at the hallway ceiling for a moment. Yes, she said. I'll have lunch. Oh. She told Damon that night. All of it, start to finish, no editorializing. He was quiet for a moment when she finished. A particular kind of quiet. She called you, he said. She called me. From my phone contacts. Via Vince. Vince, he said, and the word carried an entire paragraph. Don't be too hard on him, Elena said. I think your mother is someone who finds a way to get what she wants. Vince probably didn't stand a chance. I'm going to have a conversation with her, he said, and there was an edge in it. I know, but wait until after lunch. He paused. You're going to have lunch with her. Yes. Elena, she called me directly, she said. She could have had you relay things, or said nothing, or waited until I showed up at some family gathering unprepared. She called me. That's not nothing. He made a sound she couldn't fully interpret. You're more generous than she deserves right now. Maybe, she said, or maybe I understand what it looks like when someone's trying to do the right thing in a clumsy way. I've done it myself. The silence on his end was thoughtful. You don't have to do this, he said. You don't have to manage my family. I'm not managing anyone, she said. I'm having lunch. There's a difference. He exhaled. Will you tell me how it goes? Every word, she said. The lunch was at a restaurant near the Art Institute. Margaret's choice, quietly expensive, the kind of place where the tables were far enough apart that a private conversation was actually private. Elena arrived first by 6 minutes and spent that time looking at the menu without reading it. Margaret Cross was not what Elena had built in her head. She'd been expecting someone colder, more formal, the social armor version of her son's capabilities. What she got was a woman of 63 who was visibly carefully dressed, who moved through the room with the confidence of someone who'd occupied her share of difficult rooms, and whose eyes, when they found Elena across the restaurant, were doing the thing Elena now knew was a family trait, paying very close attention while the face held neutral. She did not look at the scar and then away. She looked at Elena and then at the empty chair across from her with an expression that said, That's her. Sit down. Let's get to it. Thank you for coming, Margaret said when she sat. Of course, Elena said. The first 10 minutes were careful, not hostile but provisional, like two people testing the floor before committing their weight. They talked about the restaurant, about the cold, about the holiday. Elena ate bread because she was nervous, and nervous eating was a habit she'd never trained out of herself. Then Margaret set down her fork and said, Tell me about your work. Not tell me about yourself. Not how did you and Damon meet. Tell me about your work. Elena understood, without being told, that this was Margaret's version of directness, that she was asking about the thing that would reveal who Elena actually was, rather than asking Elena to perform a version of herself for approval. She told her. The organization, the mission, Diane in Milwaukee and the housing crisis, and the incomplete certification and what it cost a person to restart. The carpenter who argued the rubric was philosophically invalid. The woman named Diane who wasn't going to start over not because she wasn't strong enough, but because you can only rebuild from zero so many times. The morning she'd decided this was what she was for, after her own years of starting over. Margaret listened. Really listened, not the polite performance of it, and when Elena finished, she was quiet for a moment. Damon said you were strong, she said. I thought he was in love and overstating. Elena didn't say anything. He was understating, Margaret said, and then, before Elena could respond, I owe you an apology. A real one. Not the diplomatic version I was prepared to give. You don't have to, I do, Margaret said. I decided things about you before I knew you. I decided that Damon was feeling something that clouded his judgment and that you were benefiting from that, and I said as much to him in the language of a mother who was worried. But underneath it was something smaller and less generous. She folded her hands on the table. I saw a woman with less money and a visible scar, and I thought I understood the shape of her. That was wrong. Elena held that. What changed? She asked. He called me back, Margaret said, after our first conversation. He was controlled, the way he gets when he's actually angry but won't let it show. And he said something to me. She paused. He said, Mom, if you could spend one afternoon with her, you would understand why I'm the better man when she's in the room. And then he said, that's not about fixing anything. That's about who I am when I'm paying attention to the right thing. Elena's throat did something she wasn't prepared for. She pressed her lips together and looked at the table for a second. He said that, she managed. He did. Margaret's voice was quieter now. And I thought about his father when we were young, and the way I felt when I was with someone who made me larger, not better, larger, more than I'd known I was. A pause. I'd forgotten what that felt like. I should not have let myself forget it when I looked at my son. Elena didn't trust herself to speak for a moment. I'm not an easy person, Elena said finally. I want you to know that. I carry things. I'm slow to ask for help. I've spent so long trying not to be anyone's burden that I sometimes forget how to need things normally. He's not easy either, Margaret said. He learned not to need things from watching his father. It took Caroline years to teach him otherwise. She looked at Elena directly. Maybe that's not a coincidence, that you found each other. Elena breathed. I don't know what we are yet, she said. I know what it feels like. I don't know what it becomes. Neither does anyone, Margaret said. That's not a deficiency. That's just how it works. They sat in the restaurant for 2 hours. They ordered dessert, which neither of them had planned. By the time they walked out onto the Michigan Avenue sidewalk into the December cold, something had shifted. Not resolved, not erased, but moved into a different position. The kind of shift that doesn't announce itself but changes what's possible. Damon said you make congee, Margaret said at the door. Elena blinked. He told you that? He mentioned it. He said you make it from scratch at odd hours. A small, real smile. He said it in the same way he talks about things he finds remarkable. She put her coat on. I'd like to try it sometime. Elena looked at her for a moment. Okay, she said. I'll make it for you. Margaret nodded, satisfied, and walked toward the waiting car. Elena stood on the sidewalk in the cold and watched her go. She stood there longer than was strictly necessary. Then she pulled out her phone. She called Damon. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he'd been waiting. How was it? He said. She told me what you said to her, Elena said, about being a better man. A pause. Did I overstep? He said. No, she said. Her voice came out rougher than she'd meant it to. No, you didn't overstep. Elena, I'm fine, she said, and meant it this time completely. I'm absolutely fine. I just needed a second. She stood in the December cold, the Art Institute at her back, Michigan Avenue moving around her, and she held the phone to her ear and breathed, and the city did what cities do, kept going, indifferent and enormous, full of people living their particular versions of difficult and beautiful and ordinary, all of it at once. Come over tonight, he said. Lily made something. I'm not entirely sure what it is. She's calling it a winter project. Does it involve the T-Rex? It involves some cardboard, what appears to be half a roll of tape, and one of my good pens that she's denied using. Elena laughed, and the sound surprised her the way genuinely good things sometimes still did. I'll bring food, she said. Real food, not the cardboard. Please, he said. She walked toward the train in the cold, and the Christmas lights were coming on along the street, and she thought about what Margaret had said, larger, not better, and she held it in the place where the other thing had lived for so long, the one that told her she was too much of a problem to be someone's anything. She held the two things next to each other, and she let herself carefully and deliberately begin to believe the new one. The winter project turned out to be a castle, not a small one. Lily had spent the better part of 3 evenings constructing something that occupied a significant portion of the living room floor and incorporated 2 cardboard boxes, approximately 40% of the tape in the apartment, several paper towel tubes that she'd been quietly collecting without explanation, and, confirmed by the ink stain on her left thumb, one of Damon's good pens, which she continued to deny having used despite all available evidence. When Elena arrived that evening with a bag of groceries and her coat still cold from the outside air, Lily met her at the door and said, without preamble, I need your opinion on the East Tower. Elena looked at the castle. She set her bag down on the kitchen counter and crouched to examine the East Tower, which was listing approximately 15 degrees to the right and had been reinforced with what appeared to be a folded permission slip from school. It needs a counterweight, Elena said. Lily considered this. Like what? Something solid on the other side. What do you have that's heavy enough? Gerald, Lily said immediately. Your elbow freckle? My stuffed elephant. He's named Gerald now, too. I gave him the same name because I think names should be shared if they're good. Elena looked at Damon over Lily's head. He was leaning against the kitchen doorway with the expression of a man who had learned to navigate his own home like a naturalist navigating a habitat, with respect, careful attention, and the understanding that he was not, in any meaningful sense, in charge. Try the elephant, Elena said. Lily went to retrieve Gerald the elephant. Elena stood up and moved to the kitchen, and Damon stepped aside to let her in, and she started unpacking the groceries the way she'd started doing things in his kitchen over the past several weeks. Not asking where things went because she already knew, finding the cutting board without looking, filling the pot from the right faucet. It had happened gradually, the way significant things often do, the accumulation of small familiarity until one day you realize you're not a guest in someone's space anymore, but something harder to name and more permanent. How are you? He asked, quiet enough that it was just for her. Better than I was at 2 o'clock, she said. The lunch rearranged some things. In a good direction? She looked at him. Yeah, she said. I think so. He nodded. He didn't ask for details yet, which was one of the things about him that she'd come to rely on without quite noticing. The ability to let things arrive in their own time instead of pulling at them. From the living room, Lily announced that Gerald had stabilized the East Tower, and could they please come look? They went to look. The tower was, in fact, more or less vertical. Lily had wedged the stuffed elephant against the base with an architectural confidence that no one had taught her. That works, Damon said. I know, Lily said. Elena made soup that night. Not congee, just a simple chicken and vegetable soup that required chopping things and watching a pot, which was the category of cooking she turned to when she needed her hands occupied and her mind to quiet. Lily sat on the kitchen counter, which she was technically not supposed to do, and narrated the construction of the castle in the past tense, as though it were already history, already a story she was telling about something she'd made. The south wall was the hardest, Lily said, swinging her feet against the cabinet below her. I had to restart it twice. How did you know when it was right? Elena asked. Lily thought about it with the seriousness she applied to questions that didn't have obvious answers. It stopped feeling wrong, she said. Elena stirred the soup. That's a good answer, she said. I know, Lily said, and then, Elena, do you want to live here? The question arrived the way Lily's questions always arrived. without warning, without cruelty, from a place of pure and uncomplicated curiosity about the shape of things. Damon, who was at the kitchen table reviewing something on his phone, went very still. Elena kept stirring. She didn't turn around immediately, which gave her exactly 3 seconds to find the version of the truth that was honest without being more than a 7-year-old needed to carry. She turned. "Why are you asking?" Lily shrugged, which with her carried a great deal of information. "Because you're here a lot, and you know where the soup bowls are, and Dad is different when you're here." "Different how?" Lily thought about it again. "Louder," she said, "in a quiet way, like he's more here. Usually he's a little bit somewhere else." Elena held that. She looked at Lily, 7 years old, sitting on a kitchen counter with soup steam in her face, describing her father's interior life with more accuracy than most adults could manage. "I don't live here," Elena said. "Not yet, but I'm here a lot because I want to be, and your dad wants me to be, and you want me to be, I think." "I do," Lily confirmed, without hesitation. "Then that's what it is right now," Elena said. "Is that okay?" Lily considered the question like she considered most things, fully, without performance. "Yeah," she said, "but I think you should keep some of your stuff here, so you don't have to carry it." "Like what?" "A toothbrush," Lily said, "and maybe a book. You always have a book." Elena's face did something she couldn't stop. "Okay," she said, "I'll bring a toothbrush." "And a book?" "And a book." Lily nodded, satisfied, and went back to narrating the castle. Damon caught Elena's eye from across the kitchen. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The look was enough. Something between gratitude and the specific helplessness of loving a child who keeps telling the truth in the middle of your kitchen. Christmas came and went. Elena spent Christmas Eve with Priya, which was their tradition, wine and bad movies and the particular comfort of someone who'd known her since before, who loved her with the full knowledge of everything that had happened and didn't make it into anything more or less than it was. Priya asked about Damon with the frank curiosity of someone who wanted the real answer. "You look different," Priya said. "Different how?" "Less like you're waiting for something to go wrong." Elena considered that. "I'm still waiting," she said. "I'm just better at doing other things at the same time." Priya nodded. "That's growth." "Maybe," Elena said. "Or maybe it's just exhaustion." "It's not exhaustion," Priya said. "I know what you look like when you're exhausted. This is different." Elena drank her wine and watched the movie for a moment. "I'm scared," she said, after a while. Not with drama, just factually. "Of what specifically?" "Of believing it's real and being wrong." She paused. "Of it being real and not knowing how to hold it without ruining it." "You won't ruin it," Priya said. "You don't know that." "No," Priya said, "but I know you've survived the other version, the thing not being real version. You survived it many times. If it doesn't work, you survive it again. But I don't think it doesn't work." She looked at her friend. "I've never seen a man look at you and mean what he says at the same time." Elena looked at the television. "He does," she said quietly. "Mean it." "I know," Priya said. "It's visible from the outside." She spent Christmas Day with Damon and Lily and Margaret, which was not how she'd planned the holiday, but was how it ended up, and the thing about it that she'd remember afterward was not the gifts or the food, or the particular chaos of Lily opening presents with the velocity of a small natural disaster. What she'd remember was the moment in the afternoon when the wrapping paper had been cleared away and Lily was absorbed in something new, and Margaret was in the kitchen making tea, and she and Damon were sitting on the couch in the living room with the afternoon light coming through the windows. He'd reached over and taken her hand. Not to say something, not as a prelude, just taken it, settled it in his, and gone back to whatever he was looking at across the room. She'd sat with her hand in his and felt, in a way that was quiet and complete, and didn't require anything from her, that she was somewhere she was supposed to be. Not because it was perfect, not because all the hard things were resolved, but because the hard things were present and they were still here, both of them, in the same room, on the same couch, and neither of them had found a reason yet to let go. She understood, sitting there, that this was what it actually looked like. Not the version from the outside. The photographs, the event dinners, the comments about whether she was worth looking at. The real version was this: a couch, afternoon light, a 7-year-old across the room convinced that her stuffed animals needed to be formally introduced to her new toys, a man's hand around hers like it intended to stay. She tightened her grip slightly. He noticed. He didn't say anything. Tête. January brought the thing Elena hadn't fully seen coming, which was the question of her job. The organization she'd worked for had been operating on a shrinking grant base for 2 years, and in mid-January, the executive director called a staff meeting and delivered the news with the directness of someone who'd been carrying it for months and was relieved to finally put it down. Funding for 2 positions was being cut. The restructuring would take effect in March. Elena was not one of the 2 positions cut, but the organization's capacity was being reduced in ways that meant the program she'd built, the one she'd spent 3 years designing and refining and fighting for funding to keep, would be contracted, merged, handed off to a partner organization that would run them with a different philosophy and a lighter touch and significantly less of the specific attention that made the difference between a program that processed people and one that actually saw them. She drove home from that meeting in a state that wasn't quite grief but lived in the same neighborhood. She didn't call anyone immediately. She went home, made tea, sat at her kitchen table, and thought about Diane in Milwaukee, who'd had to start over, and the training cohort she'd lost to housing instability, and every person who'd come through her program needing someone to treat their restart like it mattered. She thought about the years she'd spent building something careful and specific out of the understanding of what it cost to be stuck, and whether she could stay inside a smaller version of it and still find it meaningful, or whether the meaningful part was precisely what was being reduced. She called Damon at 9. "I might be looking at what comes next," she said when she'd explained it, "not because I'm being pushed out. Because the thing I'm there for might not be there anymore." "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I know I can't go to work every day maintaining something that used to be alive and now isn't. I've done that before. It's a different kind of exhaustion than the hard work kind." "Then figure out what comes next," he said. "You've built something from nothing before." "I built it inside an organization that had infrastructure." "You built the important part," he said. "The infrastructure was just the building, the thing you actually made. That was yours." She was quiet. "I don't know what that looks like on my own." "I do," he said. "You're describing a different organization, or a different model, or something that doesn't exist yet that you could make exist." "Damon, I'm not offering to fund it," he said before she could say it. "I know what you'd say, and I'm not doing that. I'm saying that you have enough knowledge of what works and what doesn't to build something real, and you should think about it before you decide what staying looks like." She held the phone. Outside her window, January Chicago was doing its most extreme version of itself. Dark early, deeply cold, the kind of weather that reduced everything to essential. "I'll think about it," she said. She thought about it for 6 weeks. She talked to Priya, who asked the right questions. She talked to Dolores, who'd been in nonprofit work for 30 years and had the perspective of someone who'd seen every version of the cycle. She talked to Julia, Vince's wife, who had 3 board seats and a professional network she was willing to open. She didn't talk to Damon about the details, which she was careful about, not because she was shutting him out, but because she needed to know the conclusion was hers before she let anyone else's confidence in her shape it. She'd learned the difference between someone believing in you and you believing in yourself, and she'd learned it the hard way. In early March, she submitted her resignation. She'd been talking to 3 potential partner organizations, a foundation program officer who'd heard her name from Julia, and a community development corporation that was looking for someone to design a workforce arm they'd been trying to build for 2 years. She didn't have everything figured out. She had enough. She told Damon over dinner at his apartment, Lily already asleep, the castle still partially standing in the corner of the living room where it had lived for 3 months now, repaired and retaped so many times it had become something different from what it started as. "I submitted my resignation today," she said. He set down his fork. "How do you feel?" She thought about it. "Like I jumped off something," she said, "but like I know approximately where I'm going to land." That's the best you can do, he said. I know. She looked at him. I didn't ask you before I decided. I know, he said. That's right. You're not Elena, he said, and his voice was steady and clear. I watched you build something out of your own experience and your own understanding of what people need inside an organization that was slowly failing it. The last thing you needed was my opinion about whether to walk away. He held her gaze. What you needed was to make the decision yourself and to know that wherever you landed, this was still here. She breathed. Is it? Still here? Yes, he said, without qualification. She nodded, then picked up her fork. They finished dinner. The thing that happened in April was small by the measure of dramatic events. It didn't happen in a restaurant or at a family gathering or with anyone else present to witness it. It happened on a Tuesday evening in Damon's kitchen while Elena was washing dishes and Lily was at Vince and Julia's for a sleepover and the apartment was quiet. In the particular way it was quiet when it was just the two of them. She'd been washing dishes and thinking about the community development meeting she had in the morning and whether the proposal she'd drafted was specific enough in the implementation section. And Damon had been at the kitchen table with his laptop and a coffee that had gone cold, and neither of them had been talking, and it wasn't silence that needed filling. It was just the particular sound of two people living in the same space without performing at each other. At some point, she turned off the faucet and dried her hands, and when she turned around, he was watching her. What? She said. Nothing, he said. You were looking at me. I was, he said. I do that. She hung the dish towel on the handle. What were you thinking? He considered it, which he did when he was going to say the true thing rather than the easy thing. I was thinking about that first afternoon, he said. The coffee shop. You apologizing for being on time. She leaned against the counter. That's embarrassing. It's not, he said. It's the thing I think about when I think about how far you are from there. She was quiet. I'm not that far, she said. I still apologize too much. I still catch myself waiting for things to go wrong. I still sometimes wake up at 3 a.m. and run the calculation of whether I'm too much trouble to be worth it. I know, he said. And you're still farther than you were. She looked at him across the kitchen. He was still in his work clothes, the jacket off, tie long since abandoned somewhere, the particular end-of-day version of him that she'd become familiar with, slightly undone, more himself, the professional architecture laid aside. I want to tell you something, she said. Okay. She wasn't sure how to organize it, so she started from where she was. When I walked into that coffee shop in October, I had a plan, she said. The plan was to get through it. Get through the apology, get through the moment when you saw the scar, survive the hour, go home. I've been on enough of those that I had it down to a system, she paused. And then you looked at me the way you looked at me, and you said you weren't disappointed, and I didn't believe you. Not fully. I thought you were kind and that you'd figure out the correct feeling later when the novelty wore off. He was listening in the way he listened, completely, without editing himself in real time. I think I stopped waiting for the correct feeling to arrive sometime around December, she said. And I don't know if I told you that. I don't know if I said, this is real now. I believe it's real. She looked at him steadily. So, it's real. I believe it's real. I wanted you to know I got there. The kitchen was quiet. Outside, the April version of Chicago was doing something mild and tentative with the weather, like it was trying to remember what spring was supposed to feel like. Damon stood up from the table. He came across the kitchen and he stood in front of her and he put his hands on either side of her face, careful, deliberate, the left side of her jaw and the scar under his palm, like it was the most ordinary thing and also the most specific. And he looked at her for a long moment. I know you got there, he said. I've been watching you get there. She felt her eyes go hot and blinked it back. I'm not going to cry in your kitchen. You can cry in my kitchen, he said. I know I can, she said. I'm choosing not to. She put her hands over his, pressing them slightly. I love you, she said. I've been trying to figure out when to say it, and I think the answer is just now, in the kitchen, on a Tuesday. He didn't perform surprise. He didn't do any of the things people did in that moment in stories. He just held her face and looked at her with the same look he'd been giving her since a coffee shop in October. The one that said, "I see you, all of you, and I'm not going anywhere." "I love you too," he said. "I have for a while." "How long is a while?" "The farmer's market," he said, "when Lily took your hand." She laughed, slightly unsteadily. "That was November." "I know when it was." She pressed her forehead against his shoulder, which was a thing she'd started doing somewhere in the previous months when she needed to be somewhere solid for a moment. He put one arm around her and left it there. They stood in the kitchen for a while. Nothing dramatic happened. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed on the street below. She thought about the woman who'd sat in a coffee shop 6 months ago with her hand instinctively covering the left side of her face. Who'd walked in with a plan for surviving the hour? Who'd said "I'm sorry" before she'd done anything wrong? She thought about what it had taken to get from there to here. Not the things that had been done for her, not Damon's patience or Lily's unfiltered acceptance or Margaret's eventual honesty or Priya's unflinching friendship, but the part she'd done herself. The choosing to stay. The choosing to come back after every moment that made leaving feel rational. The Tuesday mornings when she'd gotten up and gone to work and done the thing anyway. The slow, unglamorous work of deciding that she was allowed to take up space in her own life and in someone else's, and that this was not asking too much. It was not a sudden transformation. That was the thing nobody told you about getting better. It wasn't a door you walked through. It was a direction you kept choosing, imperfectly, inconsistently, without always knowing if it was working, until one day you were standing in a kitchen on a Tuesday evening being held by someone who loved you, and you realized you'd traveled a significant distance without a clear memory of any single step that got you there. So, spring settled into the city over the following weeks, cautious and real. Elena's work with the Community Development Corporation took shape in the way that meaningful work does. Slowly at first, with wrong turns, with moments of genuine doubt about whether the model would hold. She was building something from scratch, which was terrifying, and she was building it from the inside of her own specific knowledge of what it cost to be forgotten by systems that were supposed to help, which was the thing that made it worth doing. Dolores joined her in May on a part-time consulting basis, with the energy of someone for whom retirement had lasted approximately 9 weeks before becoming insulting. Julia connected her with 2 foundation contacts who became the first stable funding. A social worker named Remy, who'd been in Elena's network for years, came on to lead the case management piece that Elena knew was the hardest part to get right. She didn't have enough money. She worked more hours than made practical sense. She made decisions she wasn't sure about and sometimes found out she'd been wrong and had to go back and restructure. Some weeks were very hard. Some participants cycled out of the program before they were ready, for the same reasons they always had: housing, family, the relentless pressure of a life lived with no margin for error. And she sat with those losses the same way she always had, fully, without pretending they didn't matter. But the program worked. In the incremental and imperfect way that real things work. People found jobs. Not enough people, not as fast as she wanted, not without complications. But some people, consistently, with support that treated them like the full humans they were. She measured it carefully. She wrote it down. She called her mother in June, not because things were suddenly repaired. They weren't, and she'd stopped waiting for them to be. She called because she'd started to understand that the distance from her family wasn't something that had happened to her, but something she'd partly maintained, because it felt safer to need nothing from a direction that had given her so little. She called, and the conversation was awkward and short, and not particularly healing. But she called. She'd call again. Not because the story was going to end neatly, but because she was no longer interested in leaving things alone just because they were difficult. Lily started 2nd grade. She lost a tooth and gained an opinion about whether her school's lunch program was philosophically justifiable, which she presented to Damon in a written document that was 2 pages long and included a hand-drawn chart. He read the whole thing. He argued back on 2 points. Lily revised the document and resubmitted. Elena read the revised version and told Lily that the methodology was stronger, but the conclusion section needed work. Lily asked her to explain what a conclusion section was for. Elena sat down at the kitchen table and explained. Lily rewrote it and declared it finished, which Elena seconded, and Damon called it the most thoroughly argued case for better pizza rolls he'd encountered in his professional career. Margaret came for dinner in July, and Elena made congee from scratch, at an inconvenient hour, and Margaret ate 2 bowls and said nothing complimentary out loud, because complimenting people directly was not in her vocabulary, but she asked for the recipe, which was the same thing. On an evening in late August, Elena was sitting on the floor of the living room helping Lily construct something that had started as a spaceship and was evolving, with the organic logic of Lily's projects, into something more complex and less easily categorized. Damon was on the phone in the kitchen, something about the Singapore operation, the particular low register he used when he was trying to sound unbothered about something that bothered him. Lily handed Elena a piece of tape without looking up from the thing she was building. "Do you think Dad's going to ask you to marry him?" she said. Elena took the tape. "That's a big question for a Tuesday." "It's Wednesday," Lily said. "Even bigger." Lily looked up, 7 going on 8, with her father's focus and something entirely her own, a quality of directness that wasn't unkind and wasn't careless, just honest in the way that children are honest before they learn that honesty is socially complicated. She'd started doing this more, asking the large questions with the same tone she used to ask where the scissors were. Like bigness was not a reason to soften a thing. "He looks at you the way he looks at the things that matter most to him," Lily said. "I think you're one of those now." Elena held the tape she'd been handed and felt something in her chest go quiet and full at the same time. "I think so too," she said. "So it's probably going to happen," Lily said, returning to the spaceship that wasn't. "I just wanted you to be prepared." "Prepared how?" Lily shrugged. "Say yes," she said. "Obviously." From the kitchen, Damon's voice had gone quiet, the call apparently finished. In a moment, he'd come back in. He'd probably sit on the floor next to her and ask what they were building, and Lily would explain it with comprehensive authority, and he'd listen like it mattered, because to him it did. Elena looked at the thing Lily was building. Complicated, asymmetrical, made from pieces that hadn't started as the same thing and had been assembled into something that worked anyway. She thought about all the things she'd built since the accident, since the shelter, since the first job she'd talked herself into despite the voice in her head that said she wasn't the right kind of person for anything anymore. She thought about the program, the people who'd moved through it, and the ones who'd slipped away, the ones who'd made it. She thought about Tuesday nights in a kitchen and a 7-year-old reaching up for her hand at a farmer's market because she'd decided on her own unimpeachable authority that Elena was someone worth trusting. She thought about what it had actually cost. Not the dramatic version, not the movie version, but the real accumulation of it. Getting up on the days that didn't offer a reason, saying the difficult thing instead of the easy one, letting herself need something from a direction that could also hurt her. Choosing every time to stay inside the discomfort of being seen rather than retreating into the safety of being half present and therefore half at risk. She was not the same person who'd walked into Ember and Cumberbatch Coffee on a rainy October morning with a plan to survive the hour. She was not unrecognizable from her either. She was the same person who had done the slow, grinding work of not letting what happened to her become the whole of her, and who had somehow, in the process, become someone worth choosing. That was the thing nobody said clearly enough, she thought. Not about recovery, not about love, not about any of the difficult rebuilding that real life required. Nobody said it clearly enough. The work was not glamorous. It did not happen in a single moment of revelation. It happened in the Tuesdays, in the congee at 10:30 at night, in the phone calls you made before you felt ready, in the choosing to go back inside the coffee shop for the coffee after 2 strangers had reminded you of your own worst fears about yourself. It happened in saying, "I'm in," completely. "I'm in the back seat dark on the way home through a city doing its winter thing, and meaning it even when you were scared, maybe especially then. Damon came back into the living room. He looked at the spaceship that wasn't. He looked at Elena. He sat down on the floor next to her with the ease of a man who had stopped being uncomfortable on the floor sometime around the arrival of a child who conducted most of her important projects there. "What are we making?" he said. "We haven't decided yet," Lily said. "It keeps changing." "That's okay," he said. "Things do that." He reached over and took Elena's hand the way he'd taken it on Christmas afternoon. Without announcement, without making something of it. Just took it. She let him. Outside, August Chicago was doing its last golden thing before the turn. Warm still, but with the early evening carrying the first suggestion of something different coming, the days shortening in ways you could only feel rather than see. The city moved outside the window, indifferent and enormous and full of its own 10,000 stories being lived simultaneously, most of them unremarkable from the outside and everything on the inside. Lily handed them each a piece of cardboard. "I need both of you," she said. "This part requires 3 people." They took the cardboard. They built what she needed. It took longer than expected, required starting one section over, and resulted in something that looked nothing like a spaceship but worked, structurally, better than anything they'd planned. Elena looked at it when they were done. Not smooth, not perfect, made from pieces that had been other things, assembled by people who were also, in their own ways, made from pieces that had been other things. But solid, standing, hers in all the ways that mattered, all